The look on my nephew Julian's face when he realized he wasn't just losing a business, but the very floor he was standing on, it's a memory I've replayed 100 times. 30 years of my blood, sweat, and grease went into that building, and he thought he could discard me like yesterday's trimmings. But as he stood there in his designer linen apron, trembling while the sheriff's deputy waited by the door, he finally understood one thing. You never, ever forget who paved the road you're walking on. He looked at me, his mouth working but no sound coming out, and for the first time in 3 years, the room was finally quiet. But to understand why he had no one to blame but himself, I need to take you back to the beginning. I opened the Iron Grill in 1994. It wasn't fancy, just an honest-to-God steakhouse on the corner of 4th and Main. I spent my life savings on a high-end broiler and a walk-in freezer that I personally bolted to the floor. For 30 years, I was there at 5 in the morning and didn't leave until the last glass was polished at midnight. I knew my customers' names, their kids' birthdays, and exactly how they liked their ribeyes. My wife Sarah handled the books until she passed 10 years ago, and after that, the restaurant became my whole world. It was more than a business. It was a testament to the fact that if you work hard and treat people right, you can build something that lasts. That was my first mistake, assuming everyone shared those values. Julian is my sister Martha's only son. When Martha's husband walked out on them 15 years ago, I stepped in. I paid for Julian's private school, I bought him his first car, and when he said he wanted to be a chef, I paid every cent of his tuition at the finest culinary institute in the country. I thought I was investing in family. I thought I was building a legacy. I remember the day he graduated. I felt so much pride I thought my chest would burst. I told him, Julian, one day the Iron Grill will be yours. Just learn the ropes, respect the craft, and the customers will stay loyal. The first crack in the foundation appeared the day he moved back home. He didn't want to start on the line. He didn't want to prep vegetables or learn the butcher's crets. He walked into my kitchen, looked at my seasoned cast iron pans, and made a face like he'd smelled something rotten. Uncle Artie, he said, flicking a finger at the menu, this is rustic. It's dated. People don't want 16-ounce steaks anymore. They want an experience. They want concepts. I laughed it off. I told him that as long as people had teeth, they'd want a good steak. That should have been my wake-up call. But I kept telling myself it was just a phase, just a young man wanting to make his mark. I loved that kid like he was my own son. I thought his arrogance was just confidence. I was wrong. 2 years ago, I had a minor heart scare. Nothing too serious, but the doctors told me I needed to step back. I decided it was time. I signed over the operations of the business to Julian. I kept the real estate in a separate holding company, a habit I'd picked up from my old mentor, but I gave Julian full control of the Iron Grill brand and the daily operations. I told him I'd stay on as a consultant just to help with the transition. Don't worry, Uncle Artie, he told me, flashing that bright, expensive smile I'd paid for. I'm going to take this place into the next century. If that was all, I probably would have let it go. But then came the rebrand. I took a month off to recover in Florida. When I came back, I pulled into the parking lot and didn't recognize my own life's work. The iconic neon bull sign, the one I'd had refurbished twice, was gone. In its place was a minimalist, brushed steel plaque that simply read, Nectar and Bone.
I walked inside, and my heart didn't just ache, it sank. The warm oak booths were ripped out, replaced by cold, uncomfortable marble benches. The dim, inviting lighting was gone, replaced by harsh LED strips and hanging Edison bulbs. But the worst part? The menu. My signature dry-aged ribeye was gone. In its place were deconstructed tartars and microgreen infusions. Julian didn't even greet me. He was standing by the bar talking to some girl with a clipboard. When he finally saw me, he didn't offer a hug. He just sighed. Uncle, you weren't supposed to be back until Monday. The aesthetic isn't fully calibrated yet. Aesthetic? I asked, my voice trembling. Julian, where are the booths? Where are the regulars? I saw Old Man Henderson outside, and he said the hostess told him he didn't meet the dress code for a Tuesday afternoon. Julian rolled his eyes. Mr. Henderson is 80, Uncle. He wears flannel. We're targeting the young professionals, the influencers. We're pivoting. And that's when I realized he didn't see me as his mentor. He didn't even see me as his family. He saw me as a relic, an obstacle. Over the next few months, it got worse. He started phasing me out. First, he moved my desk to a literal closet in the basement. Then he stopped inviting me to manager meetings. He changed the locks on the wine cellar and told me it was for inventory integrity. But the final straw came during our family Thanksgiving dinner. We were at Martha's house. Julian was bragging about his glowing review in some local digital magazine. I tried to chime in with a story about a regular customer, and Julian cut me off in front of the whole family. "Artie, please," he said, swirling a glass of expensive wine I'd probably paid for. The good old days were just days of mediocrity. You ran a glorified cafeteria. I'm running a brand. Maybe you should just stay in Florida full-time. You're actually a bit of a liability in the dining room. You smell like charcoal and you talk too much to the guests. It ruins the vibe. The table went silent. Martha didn't say a word. She just looked at her plate. She'd always been a bit intimidated by Julian's success. Something in me shifted that day. I didn't get angry. I didn't shout. I just took a sip of my water and looked at him. I saw the entitlement in his eyes, the way he looked at me like I was a fading shadow. "Is that how you feel, Julian?" I asked quietly. "It's just business, Uncle," he said with a smirk. "Don't take it personally." "I see," I replied. "Just business." The next morning, I received a certified letter. Julian had used his power as CEO of the operating company to terminate my consultancy. I was fired from the restaurant I built. He offered me a small severance package, provided I sign a non-disparagement agreement. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd pushed the old lion out of the den. What Julian didn't know, what he'd never bothered to check because he was too busy looking at his own reflection, was the legal structure of the property. I spent the next 2 months getting everything in order. I didn't call him. I didn't protest. I lived my life, went for walks, and met with my lawyer, a shark named Miller, who I'd known since the 80s. I also spent a lot of time on the phone with Frank. Frank has been my meat supplier for 30 years. He's the best in the business. One afternoon, Frank called me, sounding troubled. "Artie," he said, "your nephew, he's 3 months behind on his invoices. He told me to wait for the venture capital to kick in. He's also demanding I source locally foraged Wagyu, which doesn't even exist in the state. He's a clown, Artie. I'm about to cut him off." "Don't cut him off yet, Frank," I said, leaning back in my chair. "In fact, I want you to go down there today, deliver a formal notice of intent to sue for the arrears. And Frank, do it during his influencer launch party tonight."
You got it, Marty, but should I tell him? Tell him what? Should I tell him who actually owns the building? I don't think he knows the lease he's signing is with your holding company, not the restaurant LLC. No, Frank, I smiled. Let's let that be a surprise. The night of the reckoning was a Tuesday. Julian was hosting a grand reimagining event. The place was packed with people in expensive clothes who wouldn't know a good steak if it hit them in the face. I pulled up in my old truck and parked right in the front, in the spot marked reserved for CEO. I walked in wearing my old work boots and my faded iron grill cap. The hostess, a girl who looked like she was 18 and terrified, tried to stop me. "Sir, this is a private event." "I know," I said, walking past her. I found Julian in the center of the room, holding a microphone. He was mid-speech, talking about culinary synergy and the death of the steakhouse. When he saw me, his face turned a shade of purple that almost matched the beet foam he was serving. "Artie, what are you doing here? I told you, you're not welcome on the premises. I'll have security remove you." "I wouldn't do that just yet, Julian," I said, my voice calm and steady. The room went quiet. People started whispering. Right on cue, Frank walked in. He wasn't alone. He had a stack of papers in his hand and a very large man in a suit standing next to him. "Julian," Frank yelled, his voice booming across the marble floors. "I'm here for my $85,000, now." Julian stammered, his cool persona evaporating. "Frank, we discussed this. The investors—" "There are no investors, Julian," I interrupted. "I checked. You've been skimming from the payroll taxes to pay for those marble benches. That's a federal crime, by the way." Julian turned on me, his eyes full of hate. "This is my business. I own Nectar and Bone. I fired you. Get out of my restaurant." "You do own the business, Julian," I said, stepping closer. I pulled a folder from under my arm. "You own the name, the expensive chairs, and that ridiculous beet foam. But you don't own the 4 walls. You don't own the floor. And as of midnight last night, your lease has been terminated for non-payment and illegal alterations to a historical structure." Julian laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. "The lease is with Oak Street Holdings. I have a 5-year contract." "I am Oak Street Holdings, Julian," I said. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of a man's world collapsing. Julian's mouth dropped open. He looked at Frank, who just nodded. "Sir, should I tell him who actually owns the equipment he's been using? The broiler, the walk-in? Because I have the original receipts right here. They're all in Artie's name personally." Julian's sister, Martha, stepped out from the crowd. She looked horrified. "Artie, you can't do this. He's your nephew." "I spent 15 years being his Uncle Martha," I said, not breaking eye contact with Julian. "I spent 30 years building a reputation. He destroyed it in 6 months. He told me it was just business. He told me I was a liability. While today, the liability is collecting his property." I handed the folder to the sheriff's deputy who had been waiting at the bar. "Deputy, the eviction notice was served 72 hours ago. The grace period ended at 6 p.m. tonight. It is now 8:15. The deputy stepped forward. "All right, folks, party's over. Everyone needs to exit the building. Mr. Julian, you have 30 minutes to gather your personal effects. Everything bolted to the floor stays." The influencers scrambled for the door. The music stopped. The harsh LED lights felt even colder. Julian stood there, looking at the marble benches he'd been so proud of. "You're ruining me," he whispered. "I'll be bankrupt."
"You ruined yourself the moment you thought you were better than the man who fed you," I said. "You wanted a concept, Julian. Here's a concept for you. Actions have consequences." I watched them leave. I watched Julian carry a single box of his things out to his leased European sports car. He didn't look back. Martha stayed for a moment, looking at me with tears in her eyes, but I just turned away and started picking up the trash the influencers had left behind. The aftermath was quiet. I didn't reopen the restaurant. My heart wasn't in it anymore, and the Nectar and Bone renovations had stripped the soul out of the place. Instead, I sold the building to a developer who wanted to turn it into luxury lofts. I made enough on the sale to ensure I'd never have to worry about money again, and more importantly, I made sure the contract included a small plaque on the front of the building dedicated to Sarah and the 30 years of the Iron Grill. Julian filed for bankruptcy a month later. He's currently working as a line cook at a chain restaurant 2 towns over. Martha doesn't talk to me much, but that's okay. I spend my mornings fishing and my evenings reading. Every now and then, I'll walk past the old corner. The building looks different now, but the foundation is still the one I laid. My lawyer called me last week to tell me Julian tried to sue for emotional distress. Miller laughed for 5 minutes straight before hanging up. Funny how things work out. When you build something with integrity, it lasts. When you build it on ego, it collapses the moment the wind changes. I have my peace, I have my dignity, and I have the knowledge that I'm no longer a liability. I'm just a man who knows the value of his own work. And that, in the end, is worth more than any steak on the menu.